Imagine the look on those fake cops' faces when my wife, the naval base security commander, pulled out her credentials and asked, "What exactly are you gentlemen doing here?" Their faces turned as white as if they'd seen a ghost. The HOA wanted to evict us because of a 100-year-old oak tree in our yard. Perfect. We'd show them what happens when you mess with the wrong family. If you're watching this video from Texas, comment, "Don't mess with military folks" below. Now let me tell you the story of how our nightmare HOA tried to intimidate our veteran family and the bitter consequences they faced. My wife, Amanda, and I had been searching for our dream home for nearly a year. After 15 years of military relocations and living on bases, we were finally ready to put down roots. I'd served as a Marine for 12 years before transitioning to civilian life as a structural engineer, while Amanda continued her naval career, recently promoted to lieutenant colonel and appointed as security commander at the nearby naval base. When we found that beautiful colonial house with the sprawling backyard and majestic 100-year-old oak tree, we knew it was perfect, especially for our 10-year-old son Tyler, who'd spent most of his life moving from base to base. That oak tree promised tree houses, tire swings, and the childhood stability we'd always wanted to give him. The neighborhood was upscale, with immaculate lawns, coordinated mailboxes, and a sense of pristine order. That should have been our first warning sign. In our excitement to finally have our own piece of the American dream, we glossed over the HOA agreement, signing it without proper scrutiny. It was a mistake that would come back to haunt us in ways we couldn't imagine. We've faced insurgents and navigated military bureaucracy, but nothing prepared us for the suburban warfare that awaited us. 3 days after moving in, while still surrounded by boxes and the chaos of relocation, our doorbell rang. Standing there with a forced smile and a gift basket was Victoria Hamilton, the HOA president. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored pantsuit, her silver blonde hair styled in a perfect bob, and her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates," she said, handing me the basket filled with local business coupons and a laminated copy of the HOA guideline. "I wanted to personally welcome you and ensure you understand our community standards." Her gaze drifted past me to our yard, where moving boxes were stacked on the porch, and Tyler's bike lay on its side on the lawn. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Victoria spent the next 20 minutes giving us what she called a neighborly introduction, but felt more like a military inspection. She pointed out the specific shade of acceptable fence paint, the approved mailbox designs, and the strict lawn maintenance requirements. When she reached the section about landscaping modifications, her voice took on a particular edge. "That oak tree in your backyard," she said, glancing through our open back door to where the massive tree canopy was visible. "It's quite imposing. Most homeowners in our community prefer a more manicured appearance. You might consider having it removed to better align with our aesthetic standards." I remember the way my spine stiffened, the same way it did when receiving an unreasonable order in the Corps. "The oak stays," I said firmly. "It's one of the main reasons we bought this house." Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment, a flash of something cold and calculating crossing her face before her pleasant mask returned. "Well, we'll see," she said cryptically. "The HOA takes our community appearance very seriously. I'm sure you'll want to be good neighbors." As she left, Amanda caught my eye from across the room, her expression concerned. Having spent years in military intelligence before security command, she had an uncanny ability to read people. "We've got a problem," she said, quietly after Victoria was gone. "That woman isn't just enforcing rules, she's establishing dominance." The first community event a week later confirmed Amanda's assessment. The neighborhood held a welcome barbecue at the community clubhouse, and as the newcomers, we were introduced to everyone. Most neighbors seemed genuinely friendly, particularly Daniel Foster, a law professor who lived 2 doors down. He approached us with a beer in hand and a warm smile. "Don't let Victoria intimidate you," he whispered as he shook my hand. "Grillin, she runs this place like her personal fief since her husband passed." As we mingled, I noticed how people deferred to Victoria, how conversations hushed when she approached. She held court near the grill, occasionally glancing our way with that same calculating look. Near the end of the event, Victoria clinked her glass for attention. After various announcements about upcoming community events, she added, "And let's all help our new neighbors, the Blackwells, understand the importance of our standards. Their yard needs quite a bit of work to meet our community expectations." The statement, delivered with a smile but laced with public humiliation, left a tense silence. Several neighbors looked uncomfortably at their plates. I felt my face grow hot with anger, but before I could respond, Amanda pulled a warning hand on my arm. Always the strategist, she knew this wasn't the battlefield to engage on. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, Amanda pulled out a notebook and began writing. "What's that?" I asked. "Our battle plan," she replied without looking up. "Victoria has just declared war, and we need to understand the terrain." She glanced up at me with the same determined look I'd seen her when she'd tackled challenging security protocols at the base. First rule of engagement: know your enemy, know your battlefield. Tomorrow we read every word of that HOA agreement, find our allies, and identify our legal position. She was right, as usual. This was just the opening move in what would become a prolonged conflict, and we needed to be prepared. Confirmed our suspicions that we were being specifically targeted, held in the community clubhouse. It was our first opportunity to formally address the barrage of violations. Victoria presided from a raised table at the front, flanked by Walter and her other board members, while homeowners sat in neat rows like schoolchildren. The atmosphere was tense and formal, nothing like the community meetings I'd expected. When the floor opened for homeowner concerns, I stood and calmly presented our case, outlining the contradictory nature of many violations and questioning the selective enforcement. I'd barely finished speaking when Victoria cut me off. "The Blackwells have installed unauthorized plantings in their front garden beds," she announced, as Walter projected photos of Amanda's newly planted marigolds onto the wall. "The landscaping covenant clearly requires approval for any modification." Daniel immediately stood up beside me. "Point of order," he said firmly. "As a board member 2 years ago, I can confirm annual flowers have never required prior approval. The covenant specifically addresses structural and permanent plantings." A murmur of agreement rose from several homeowners, but Victoria's expression remained unmoved. "The board has reinterpreted that section," she stated coldly. "All changes require approval. The fine stands at $500 with an additional $50 daily until the unauthorized plantings are removed." A vote was called, and despite Daniel's arguments and a few sympathetic looks from neighbors, the board approved the fines, 6-1, with only Daniel dissenting. As we left the meeting, the isolation was palpable. A few neighbors offered uncomfortable smiles, but quickly averted their eyes. We were being made an example of, and everyone knew it. Later that evening, as we watched the security footage, Amanda pointed to the screen. "There," she said, highlighting Walter's SUV parked across from our house at 2 in the morning. "He's been here nearly every night this week. This isn't normal HOA monitoring. This is surveillance." Her eyes narrowed as she studied the footage, and I'm going to find out why. For the next 2 weeks, Amanda and I gathered intelligence like we were back in active military operations. Our security cameras captured Walter's late-night drive-bys, sometimes accompanied by Victoria herself. On one particularly troubling occasion, our footage showed them actually entering our backyard at 1:30 in the morning, Victoria pointing at the oak tree while Walter took photographs and measurements. The trespassing was blatant, but still we didn't confront them. As Amanda put it, "Let them think we're clueless.
The element of surprise is worth more than an immediate confrontation. Daniel's legal expertise proved invaluable, helping us document each violation notice and prepare responses citing actual county regulations. "You're not the first family they've targeted," he told us one evening, voice low despite being in our living room. "Remember Nancy mentioned the Parkers? I think you should talk to Melissa Parker. She moved to the subdivision across the highway last year after selling her house here at a significant loss." He wrote down her address and phone number. "Just don't mention I sent you. Victoria has a long memory for perceived disloyalty." Melissa Parker turned out to be a nervous woman in her mid-40s, initially reluctant to speak with us until I mentioned the oak tree. Her expression immediately changed. "They tried to force us to remove our heritage oak," she said, inviting us inside her much smaller home. "The fines became unbearable, $1,500 a month by the end. My husband lost his job during CO and we just couldn't fight them anymore." Her hands trembled slightly as she showed us their documentation. "Victoria claimed our tree violated some obscure height restriction that no one had ever enforced before, but the real reason came out after we sold. That reason," Melissa explained, "was a planned commercial development. A developer had purchased several adjacent properties at the edge of the neighborhood and needed access through what was now green space behind several properties, including where our house stood. The massive oak trees on these properties presented obstacles to their plans. 3 months after we left, they rezoned that whole section," she said bitterly. "The trees came down and construction started. I heard Victoria got a consulting fee from the developer." Armed with this new information, Amanda dug deeper. Through her military connections, she accessed public records that would have taken civilians weeks to compile. "Councilmember Gregory Matthews," she said, spreading documents across our dining room table late one night. "He's on the planning commission that approved the rezoning where the Parkers lived. He's also an investor in Pinnacle Development Group." She tapped another document. "And look who else is connected to Pinnacle." The financial disclosure showed Victoria Hamilton listed as a special consultant receiving substantial quarterly payments. The picture was becoming clearer. Victoria wasn't just enforcing HOA rules out of some power trip. She was systematically forcing out homeowners whose properties interfered with a larger development plan. Our oak tree, like the Parkers, stood in the way of the next phase. "There's more," Amanda said grimly. "The HOA financial records Daniel helped me access show significant funds diverted to special legal consultations with no detailed accounting. I'm betting that money is going directly to Victoria or being used to fund this harassment campaign." The next day, I took time off work to visit Eleanor Turner, an elderly resident Daniel mentioned who had lived in the neighborhood since its founding. Her home was filled with community memorabilia and records she'd kept as the unofficial neighborhood historian. "The Oaks were here long before the houses," she confirmed, showing me original survey maps from the 1960s. "They were specifically protected in the original development plan. There's even a clause in the original HOA covenant, which should still be binding, designating them as protected natural assets of the community." Our investigation took a decisive turn when Amanda discovered that Walter Brooks had a history Victoria had carefully concealed before joining the HOA board. He'd been forced to retire from the police department under suspicious circumstances involving falsification of evidence. This wasn't just an overzealous former cop. This was someone with a proven willingness to break rules and fabricate documentation. While Amanda was at work the next day, I noticed Walter parked down the street watching our house through binoculars, not even trying to be subtle anymore. Deciding to take a calculated risk, I approached his vehicle directly. "Finding any violations today, Walter?" I asked pleasantly, watching him fumble to lower the binoculars. His face reddened, but he quickly recovered, his expression hardening. "Just doing my job, Blackwell. Someone has to maintain standards around here." As he started his engine to leave, he added ominously, You military types think you're special, think the rules don't apply to you. Victoria is not going to let this neighborhood's value destroy. You should start packing now, save yourself the trouble. That evening, Amanda returned from the base looking troubled. She waited until Tyler was in bed before sharing what she discovered. I was making copies of the HOA financial records in the clubhouse office when I nearly got caught, she whispered, though we were alone in our kitchen. Victoria and Walter came in while I was in the copy room. They didn't see me, but I heard everything. She pulled out her phone and played her recording. Victoria's voice came through clearly. Matthew says the zoning commission meets next month. We need those properties cleared by then, especially the Blackwells. That oak has to go one way or another. Walter's gruff voice replied, The legal route is taking too long, Brooks. I think I can find another way to speed things up if needed. Victoria laughed, a cold, calculating sound that sent chills down my spine. Do what you need to do, just make sure it can't be traced back to us or the association. I've worked too hard to let some military family with their precious tree derail everything. The recording ended, and Amanda and I sat in stunned silence. This wasn't just harassment anymore. They were openly discussing illegal actions against us. The next morning, a certified letter arrived calling for an emergency HOA meeting. The single agenda item, legal action against the Blackwells residents for multiple covenant violations and consideration of eviction proceedings. They were making their move, forcing a confrontation before we could gather more evidence. As Daniel explained when we called him in a panic, they're trying to rush this through while they still control the narrative. If you can expose what you've learned at this meeting in front of all the homeowners, Victoria's power base could crumble. We had 3 days to prepare our defense and counterattack. The battle lines were drawn, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Our home, our community standing, and apparently the fate of our beloved oak tree. But Victoria and Walter had made a critical error in their calculations. They'd chosen to go to war with 2 career military strategists who knew how to prepare for battle. Time to organize our intelligence, Amanda said decisively, spreading our evidence across the dining room table. Let's show them what happens when you bring a ruler to a gunfight. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Thursday, deliberately inconvenient for working families, which was undoubtedly part of Victoria's strategy. Amanda took a rare day off. To finalize our documentation, we decided against hiring an attorney, despite Daniel's recommendation. They'll expect legal representation, Amanda had reasoned, but they won't expect us to be more prepared than their own lawyer. We understood bureaucratic warfare and document-based battles better than most civilians. It had been our daily reality for years in the military. Victoria had secured Ryan Harrison, a slick HOA attorney known for aggressive tactics against homeowners. His reputation preceded him. He'd helped multiple associations force out problematic residents through legal intimidation. What Victoria didn't know was that Amanda had thoroughly researched his case history, identifying patterns in his arguments and several instances where he'd overreached and lost when challenged properly. The atmosphere in the clubhouse that evening was tense, with a larger turnout than usual. Curious neighbors filled the chairs, while Victoria and the board sat at their elevated table, looking smugly confident. Ryan Harrison sat beside them, his expensive suit and carefully arranged legal documents projecting an air of unassailable authority. We took our seats in the front row, calm and prepared, which seemed to momentarily unsettle Victoria. She clearly expected us to appear intimidated. This emergency session addresses the ongoing violations at the Blackwell residence, Victoria began without preamble. Due to the frequency and severity of infractions, the board has authorized legal proceedings. She nodded to Harrison, who stood and distributed packets to the board members. These homeowners have demonstrated consistent disregard for community standards, including unauthorized landscaping, improper maintenance, and most seriously, refusal to address the hazardous oak tree that violates height and safety regulations. Harrison projected images onto the wall, carefully angled photos making our well-maintained property look unkempt, complete with red circles highlighting supposed violations. Most concerning, he continued smoothly, is the independent arborist report confirming the oak presents an imminent safety hazard to surrounding properties. He displayed an official-looking document with charts indicating structural weakness in the tree. The association has no choice but to demand immediate removal with daily fines of $1,000 until compliance is achieved. When it was finally our turn to respond, I stood calmly, thanking the board for the opportunity to address these concerns. First, I began, I'd like to verify the credentials of the arborist who prepared this report. Harrison smirked, producing a certificate. Martin Consulting, fully licensed and bonded. Their assessment is beyond question. I nodded thoughtfully before responding. Interesting, since Martin Consulting went out of business 18 months ago. The room fell silent as I projected an official state business dissolution notice onto the wall. This report is forged, which constitutes fraud in legal proceedings. I could see Harrison's confident expression falter as Amanda stood beside me, distributing our own documentation to board members and interested homeowners. Furthermore, she continued seamlessly, the original community covenant explicitly protects heritage oaks as community assets. She displayed Eleanor's historical records, highlighting the relevant sections. This protection predates and supersedes any subsequent amendments about height restrictions. For the next 20 minutes, we methodically dismantled each accusation, producing photographic evidence contradicting their claims about our property's condition, citing relevant county ordinances that took precedence over HOA rules, and finally, revealing the documented connection between Victoria, Councilmember Matthews, and Pinnacle Development. The shocked murmurs from the audience grew as we presented financial records showing questionable allocation of HOA funds coinciding with consulting payments from the developer. Victoria's face had transformed from confident to furious. "This is absurd," she interrupted, her voice rising. "These military people are fabricating conspiracy theories because they can't be bothered to follow simple rules like everyone else." She looked to Harrison for support, but the attorney was frantically reviewing our documentation, clearly caught off guard by the thoroughness of our response. The judge presiding over the hearing, whom Harrison had likely expected to be a rubber stamp, studied the conflicting reports with growing concern. "These are serious allegations on both sides," she finally said. "I'm granting a 2-week continuance for proper verification of these documents and claims." She fixed Harrison with a stern look, "and I expect confirmation of that arborist's credentials and an explanation for the discrepancy noted by Mr. Blackwell." It became apparent that the noise of my systems might cause them some permanent damage. As the meeting dissolved into heated discussions among homeowners, Walter cornered Victoria near the exit, their heated whispers just audible from where I stood gathering our materials. "This is getting out of control," he hissed. "They've got too much. We need to move to Plan B before they find the zoning applications." Victoria's response chilled me. "Take care of it tomorrow. I don't care how, just make them understand they're not welcome here anymore." Their expressions as they looked our way contained something more dangerous than mere annoyance. There was desperation now, and desperation often led to reckless actions. Daniel approached us as we headed to our car, his expression grave. "You've rattled them, and that's dangerous," he warned. "Victoria doesn't lose gracefully. Watch yourselves." Amanda nodded, her military training evident in her alert posture and scanning gaze. "We're well aware," she replied. "The cameras are running 24/7, and I've added motion sensors. They won't catch us unprepared." What none of us realized then was just how far Victoria and Walter were willing to go, and how soon they would make their desperate move. 2 days after the hearing, I had to attend an overnight engineering conference in Atlanta. I'd been reluctant to leave given the escalating situation, but Amanda had insisted. "We can't put our lives on hold because of their intimidation tactics," she'd reasoned. "Besides, I'm perfectly capable of handling any situation that arises." As a military security commander, she certainly was. But neither of us anticipated exactly what form Victoria's B plan would take. According to what Amanda told me later, it was around 8:30 in the evening when the doorbell rang. Tyler was already in bed, and Amanda was reviewing security protocols for an upcoming base inspection. Through the doorbell camera, she saw two men in police uniforms standing on our porch, looking official and serious. Something immediately triggered her professional suspicion. Their uniforms looked correct at first glance, but small details were off. The badges didn't catch the porch light quite right, and their stance lacked a practiced posture of actual officers. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Brendan Miller, and this is Officer Scott Daniels with the County Sheriff's Department," the taller one announced when she opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. He held up what appeared to be a badge and ID, moving it too quickly for proper verification. "We have an inspection and potential eviction order for this property related to multiple HOA violations and safety concerns." The second officer held up an official-looking document with county letterhead. Amanda maintained her composure, though she immediately recognized this as the desperate ploy it was. "May I see that documentation more carefully, please?" she asked politely. The man calling himself Brendan hesitated before passing the paper through the partially open door. Amanda's trained eye immediately spotted the regularities. The county seal was slightly blurred, and the judge's signature didn't match the documentation from our hearing. Most damning was the misspelling of jurisdiction in the header. "This seems unusual for a routine HOA matter," Amanda commented, stalling as she covertly texted her colleague, Officer Tiffany Wells, at the actual sheriff's department. "What did you say your badge numbers were again?" Both men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging quick glances. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job," the second man said with forced authority. "A rancher called the Dara. We need to inspect the property immediately, particularly the oak tree that's been deemed hazardous." Amanda heard Tyler's bedroom door open upstairs. The unfamiliar voices had woken him. "Mom, what's happening?" he called down, his voice small and frightened. "Everything's fine, honey," Amanda replied calmly. "Just some confusion with some gentlemen at the door. Go back to bed, please." She turned back to the alleged officers. "I'm going to need to see your badges again, and I'll need to call your supervisor to confirm this unusual nighttime enforcement of a civil matter." The men became visibly agitated. "Ma'am, refusing to comply with law enforcement is a serious offense," the first said, his hand moving toward his holster in what was clearly meant to intimidate. That was the moment Amanda decided to end the charade. She pulled out her Naval Security Commander identification and held it up to the door gate. "Gentlemen, I am Lieutenant Colonel Amanda Blackwell, Security Commander at Naval Station Norfolk. I believe you're impersonating police officers, which is a federal offense. My colleague at the Sheriff's Department is on her way to verify your credentials, and I suggest you explain yourselves before she arrive." The transformation was immediate and somewhat pathetic. The false confidence drained from their faces, replaced by genuine fear. The second man, Scott, actually took a step back. "Look, we didn't know. We were just hired to—" The first man cut him off with a sharp look. "We have legitimate business here," he insisted, though his voice had lost its authoritative edge. "We were contracted by the HOA to inspect by Walter Brooks, specifically," Amanda interrupted, watching their expressions confirm her suspicion, "to intimidate my family with false legal documents while my husband is conveniently out of town." She pulled out her phone, which had been recording the entire interaction. "Every word of this conversation is being documented, as is your presence on my property under false pretenses. You have exactly 30 seconds to explain who you really are before I place you under citizen's arrest for impersonating law enforcement officers." The facade crumbled completely. Scott blurted out, "It was just supposed to be a scare tactic. Brooke said you'd back down if official-looking cops showed up with eviction paperwork. We weren't supposed to actually do anything." Brendan tried to maintain some composure, but his partner's confession had destroyed any remaining pretense. "We're private investigators," he claimed, though Amanda doubted even that was true. "Brooks hired us to deliver the notice and take photos of the tree, that's all." The wail of approaching sirens settled the matter. Officer Tiffany Wells arrived with 2 patrol cars, having responded to Amanda's text with appropriate urgency. I had seen the body camera footage from that night. The look of absolute shock on the faces of Brendan and Scott as they were handcuffed and read their rights was something I wish I'd witnessed in person. As they were placed in separate patrol cars, Scott broke down completely, admitting they were former security guards who occasionally did special jobs for Walter when he needed to intimidate people. He also confirmed that Walter had specifically mentioned using this tactic because I would be away, assuming Amanda would be easier to intimidate as just a military wife. That serious miscalculation would prove to be Victoria and Walter's undoing. While Tiffany processed the fake officers, Amanda called me in Atlanta, then immediately contacted her commanding officer to report the incident. By morning, what had been a neighborhood HOA dispute had escalated into potential federal charges for conspiracy, impersonation of law enforcement, attempted intimidation, and fraud. As I drove home the next morning, Amanda's words over the phone kept replaying in my mind. They've crossed the line from harassment to criminal activity now. We stop playing defense and start the counterattack. I returned home to find our quiet suburban house transformed into what Amanda jokingly called Operation HOA Freedom. Our dining room table had disappeared beneath maps, documents, timelines, and legal paperwork. Amanda, still in her naval uniform after reporting the incident to her superiors, was coordinating with Tiffany Wells and Daniel Foster when I arrived. Tyler was staying with friends for the weekend, a precaution we'd both agreed was necessary until the situation was resolved. Brendan and Scott rolled over completely, Tiffany explained as I set down my overnight bag. They've provided signed statements confirming Walter hired them specifically to intimidate your family using fake law enforcement credentials and fraudulent court documents. We executed a search warrant on Walter's home this morning and found templates for the fake documents, along with notes about your schedules and security camera positions. She shook her head in disbelief. This goes way beyond typical HOA overreach. We're looking at multiple felony charges. Amanda had already leveraged her military connections to accelerate the investigation. The Naval Criminal Investigation Service is involved now, she explained, in attempting to intimidate a military officer through impersonation of law enforcement potentially violates federal statutes. They're particularly interested in the surveillance Walter conducted, including any potential compromise of military security given my position. Her expression was resolute, the professional security commander rather than the frustrated homeowner. Victoria and Walter didn't just pick the wrong family to harass, they inadvertently created a national security concern. Daniel had brought additional ammunition to our counteroffensive. I've been documenting Victoria's HOA violations for years, he revealed, spreading meticulously organized folders across our table. Selective enforcement, procedural violations, financial irregularities, all of it. Most homeowners were too intimidated to fight back, but I kept records, anticipating that eventually someone would stand up to her. He smiled grimly. I just didn't expect it would involve fake cops and federal charges. Our ally list had grown significantly since the fake police incident. Nancy Sullivan had contacted Amanda the morning after, horrified by what had happened and eager to provide internal HOA documentation showing Victoria had authorized unusual security consultation payments to Walter outside the normal board approval process. Several other neighbors, previously too intimidated to speak out, now came forward with their own stories of harassment and selective enforcement. The most valuable new alliance came from an unexpected source. Mark Reynolds, an investigative journalist with the regional newspaper, had been investigating Pinnacle Development Group's connections to local officials for months when he caught wind of our situation through Tiffany's police connections. He reached out immediately. "This is the missing piece," he explained during our first meeting. "I've been tracking suspicious zoning changes and property acquisitions throughout the county. Victoria Hamilton's name has appeared peripherally, but I couldn't establish a direct connection to the development group or council member Matthews until now." Mark's investigation had uncovered a pattern of targeted harassment in multiple HOA communities where Pinnacle wanted to develop. The strategy was consistent: identify properties blocking potential development, use HOA regulations to harass owners until they sold at below market value, then mysteriously exempt the new owners, Pinnacle shell companies, from the same regulations. "What makes your case unique," Mark noted, "is that you fought back with evidence. Most victims just eventually cave under the financial and emotional pressure." With Walter lying low after the police search and Victoria suddenly unavailable to comment to anyone, we accelerated our counter-offensive. Amanda and I coordinated our respective areas of expertise. She handled the law enforcement and security angles, while I worked with Daniel on the HOA regulatory violations and with Mark on documenting the development conspiracy. Tyler returned home, relieved to find our house now regularly patrolled by actual police officers as part of the ongoing investigation. Victoria, however, wasn't surrendering without a fight. 3 days after the fake police incident, every homeowner received an emergency notice announcing another HOA meeting. The agenda listed a single item: presentation of conclusive evidence regarding the Blackwell residence violations and legal action authorization. She was making one final desperate push, trying to rally the community against us before the criminal investigation became public knowledge. What Victoria didn't know was that we'd anticipated this move. Amanda had arranged for Officer Wells to attend in an official capacity to address the false police impersonation incident. Mark Reynolds would be there to document everything for his investigation. We'd also confirmed that FBI agent Mitchell, who specialized in public corruption cases, would attend after finding concerning connections between Councilmember Matthews and several other development projects with similar patterns of harassment. The night before the meeting, Amanda and I sat on our back porch looking up at the massive oak tree that had become the unlikely centerpiece of this suburban battle. Its branches stretched protectively over our yard, just as they had for a century before our arrival. "Do you regret buying this house?" I asked Amanda, as we sipped our coffee in the evening quiet. She considered the question seriously before answering. "No," she finally said. "In the military, we're taught that the things most worth protecting rarely come without a fight. This home, this tree, what they represent for Tyler's future, they're worth defending." She reached over and took my hand. "Besides, Victoria picked the wrong enemies. We faced worse than a power-hungry HOA president and her rent-a-cop sidekick." As we prepared our final strategies late into the night, we received an unexpected call from Tiffany. "You need to know something before tomorrow's meeting," she said, her voice urgent. "We've discovered Victoria filed an actual court order today, a legitimate one this time, using the same fraudulent arborist report about your oak tree being hazardous. The judge who signed it wasn't aware of the ongoing investigation or the document fraud allegations. Technically, it's a valid inspection order until challenged in court. Victoria's final play was both desperate and cunning, using the legitimate legal system to accomplish what her criminal attempt had failed to do. She's trying to create legal cover for what Walter did, Amanda realized. If there's a valid court order, they can argue the fake officers were just misunderstanding rather than an intentional criminal act. We spent the next hour on the phone with Daniel, developing a strategy to counter this latest maneuver. The HOA meeting was no longer just about clearing our names. It had become our opportunity to expose the entire conspiracy before Victoria could establish her misleading narrative. The clubhouse was packed beyond capacity for the emergency meeting. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood about the fake police incident, with rumors and speculation running wild. Victoria sat at the center of the board table, composed and confident as ever, with Ryan Harrison beside her preparing legal documents. Walter's seat remained conspicuously empty. He had apparently called in sick, unwilling to face the community after the police search of his home. I noticed several unfamiliar faces scattered throughout the audience, including a stern-looking man in a well-tailored suit, who I later learned was FBI agent Mitchell. Victoria called the meeting to order with practiced authority, acknowledging the larger-than-usual attendance with a thin smile. We're here to address ongoing serious violations at the Blackwell property and to authorize final legal action, she began smoothly. Despite numerous notices and opportunities to comply, these homeowners have consistently defied community standards, culminating in their dangerous refusal to remove a hazardous tree that threatens surrounding property. Ryan Harrison stood to distribute packets to board members. As you can see, we now have a court-ordered inspection and potential removal authorization for the oak tree in question, he announced, projecting the document on the wall screen. A county judge has reviewed the evidence and found merit in our safety concerns. Furthermore, he continued with a pointed look in our direction, any attempts to obstruct this legal order will result in contempt charges. Victoria's smile took on a victorious edge as she added, "There have been some unfortunate misunderstandings recently regarding enforcement procedures. The board regrets any confusion, but wants to emphasize that all actions taken have been in the community's best interest and within legal boundaries. Now we'll proceed with the vote to allocate funds for enforcement of the court order and potential legal fees." It was the moment we'd been preparing for. I stood to address the room, feeling Amanda's reassuring presence beside me. "Before any vote occurs, we have important information the entire community needs to hear," I began calmly. What Victoria characterizes as unfortunate misunderstandings was actually criminal impersonation of law enforcement officers with fraudulent court documents orchestrated by board member Walter Brooks at Victoria's direction. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as Officer Tiffany Wells stepped forward in full uniform. "I'm Officer Wells with the County Sheriff's Department," she announced. 2 individuals were arrested at the Blackwell residence for impersonating police officers and presenting fraudulent court documents. They have provided sworn statements identifying Walter Brooks as the person who hired them to intimidate the Blackwells and force access to their property. She proceeded to outline the criminal investigation, confirming that Walter was currently under investigation for multiple felonies. Victoria's face had drained of color, but she quickly recovered. "This is absurd," she interjected. "Walter may have exercised poor judgment in hiring private security, but any suggestion of criminality or board involvement is preposterous. We have a legitimate court order now, which proves our concerns were valid all along." Amanda stepped forward then, her naval security credentials visible on her lapel. "That court order was obtained using the same fraudulent arborist report that we disproved in the previous meeting," she stated, projecting both documents side by side. "Martin Consulting, the supposed author of this report, ceased operations 18 months ago. We have confirmation from the state licensing board that no legitimate arborist has inspected our tree." She turned to address the homeowners directly. "But this goes far beyond a dispute about a tree." With practiced precision, Amanda and I laid out the full conspiracy we'd uncovered, supported by Daniel's documentation and Mark's investigative findings. We revealed Victoria's financial connection to Pinnacle Development, the pattern of harassment against homeowners whose property stood in the way of development plans, and the misuse of HOA funds to finance these efforts. Mark Reynolds stood to confirm his newspaper would be publishing an expose the following day, complete with financial records and sworn statements from previous victims like Melissa Parker. The atmosphere in the room transformed as the evidence mounted. Shocked gasps and angry murmurs replaced the usual deferential silence that accompanied Victoria's proclamations. Several homeowners stood to share their own experiences of selective enforcement and intimidation emboldened by our stand. Nancy Sullivan, trembling visibly but determined, confirmed that Victoria had directed her to falsify meeting minutes and financial records on multiple occasions. "I was afraid of losing my job," she admitted tearfully, "but I can't be part of this anymore." Victoria's carefully constructed facade began crumbling before our eyes. "These are malicious fabrications," she insisted, her voice rising with desperation. "This military family moved in and immediately started causing problems, refusing to follow simple rules that everyone else manages to obey. They've concocted this elaborate conspiracy theory because they're too stubborn to remove one dangerous tree." Her tirade was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of Councilmember Matthews, who had slipped into the back of the room during the presentations. "I want to clarify that my involvement with Pinnacle Development has always been properly disclosed and entirely above board," he announced nervously, clearly trying to distance himself from Victoria. "Any suggestion that zoning decisions were influenced by improper considerations is categorically false." This desperate attempt at damage control was immediately undermined when FBI agent Mitchell identified himself, approaching Matthews with a cordial but firm demeanor. "Councilman, I believe we should continue this conversation downtown. We have some questions about certain financial transactions between your office and Pinnacle subsidiaries." The councilman's face fell as he realized his political career was likely over. The final blow came when Eleanor Turner, supported by her walker and accompanied by several longtime residents, presented the original community covenant and historical records proving the heritage oaks were protected in the founding documents. "Victoria knew this," she stated firmly. "I showed her these records when she first started pressing the Parkers about their tree. She deliberately ignored the covenant to pursue her development deals." Victoria, seeing her position completely undermined, made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. "As board president, I'm adjourning this meeting immediately," she declared, gathering her papers. "These allegations will be addressed through proper legal channels, not in this irregular forum." She gestured urgently to Ryan Harrison, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Daniel Foster stood in response. "Point of order," he called firmly. "HOA bylaws allow for emergency removal of board members when evidence of malfeasance is presented. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in President Hamilton and temporary suspension pending full investigation of these allegations." The motion was seconded immediately by multiple homeowners, and despite Victoria's protests, the vote proceeded. The result was overwhelming, 38-3, in favor of removing Victoria from her position. As Victoria was escorted from the clubhouse by Officer Wells for questioning, the community erupted in applause. Daniel was elected interim president by unanimous consent, with a mandate to conduct a full audit of HOA finances and operations. Ryan Harrison quietly slipped out during the confusion, distancing himself from his disgraced client. The FBI took Councilmember Matthews aside for a formal interview, while Mark Reynolds collected final statements for his article. In the aftermath, our oak tree was officially designated a protected heritage tree by unanimous vote of the new HOA board. The planned expansion of the Pinnacle development was halted pending investigation, and Victoria faced multiple criminal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and misappropriation of HOA funds. Walter eventually accepted a plea deal, testifying against Victoria in exchange for reduced charges. 1 month later, we hosted a neighborhood barbecue beneath the sprawling branches of our oak tree. Families that had barely spoken to each other under Victoria's divisive leadership now mingled freely, sharing stories of relief and renewed community spirit. Tyler had started a neighborhood nature club for the children, using our oak as their meeting spot. The once contentious tree had become a symbol of resilience and community victory. You know, I told Amanda as we watched our neighbors enjoying the afternoon,